And I want to welcome Tess Whitehurst to the program. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
I met you many, many months ago. I don't know, maybe even a year ago, the first time on the Magic Monday podcast that you do with
Yeah.
Natasha. How long have you been doing that?
I think since 2019, maybe a couple
Nice.
years.
Very cool. And I mean, you're a celebrated author and you're a speaker and you facilitate. I mean, there's so much you do. I kind of want to let you introduce yourself to us, and then I'll ask you some questions.
Okay. So I'm Tess Whitehurst. I am an author and a spiritual teacher and a podcaster. And I am really fascinated with the point where the invisible and visible meet,
Hmm.
learning to um, learning to empower myself, teach other people to empower themselves, the ways that we can empower ourselves and inspire ourselves and heal ourselves through an awareness of a connection to our bodies, the present moment, the mystery of everything, the earth. Um, really, I guess I'm fascinated with being a human and discovering how to do that in the most fun, joyful, expansive, loving, open hearted way. So that's my spiritual practice, and that's what I teach and write about.
That's so beautiful. How long have you experienced calling yourself a witch? Was that a path that was just set up for you in your culture growing up, or is that something you had to discover as you got older?
Well, I did discover it, but looking back, I do feel like I always knew it, even if I didn't know it. I remember looking there was a college in my town where I lived. I lived in two different towns growing up because my parents were divorced. But in one of the towns, there was a college and they had a library, and I would always look for spell books there. And I never found them, but I always looked. And then when I went away, when I went away to college in Pasadena, California, I found spell books at the bookstore. And that was so exciting to me. But even as a child, I remember, like young child before my parents got a divorce, so 3 or 4, being in the backyard, and I remember sending energy and love to my cousin because I missed him and I hadn't seen him for a while. So I gathered up leaves and I
Mm.
let them open them up to the breeze and imagined sending him love on the breeze. So I just, it's been in my mom. I feel like my mom did pass it to me, even though she didn't say that's what she was doing. She just kind of taught me to be intuitive and to believe in that in my power, even though we have a problematic relationship. It there that she did teach me, and I do really value that.
And what's your lineage? Like, what's the ancestral heritage?
Oh, I am a lot British. I have a lot of English, Irish. I also have Swiss, German, Norwegian, and a quarter Italian.
Nice. I just love to hear what lands and cultures make up a person's body.
Isn't it interesting?
It is because I think when we look into our ancestry, all of our ancestors at some point had this incredible animistic relationship with the planet. And so
Yeah.
I love how that for some of us that just were born with that already awakened in us. Others,
Hmm.
they find it and discover it, but it sounds like you were just born naturally in that still.
Hmm. Yeah, and I grew up in an agricultural part of California too. So, and I'm descended from farmers on both sides. So, I had a real intuit. I mean, I didn't realize till I was an adult how that was unique. Just kind of intuitively feeling connected to plants and growing things.
So I want to know, one thing I'm always teaching and talking about, and I spoke about it, kind of recently with you and Natasha, is about the newfound understanding of co-regulating with the planet. You know, um, there's so much about forest bathing and feeling relaxed in nature and kind of seeing nature as this environment and not always as a being. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
very curious how you see that. How do you experience Earth? How do you experience being with Earth?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, in many different ways, I mean, I could talk about it in many different ways, even though I could also think of it as a singular way. But one of the ways is by connecting with the elements uh, as having consciousness. So, for example, I have a creek that is walking distance from my house, and I like to go there and sit there and then move through the elements. So, earth, air, fire, water, spirit. So, earth, I'll think of earth and then I'll feel the rock I'm sitting on and I'll just tune into the plants and the trees, but feel it as life, as a spirit. Like I'm seeing, like the way you look, the way you feel when you pet your cat or you hug someone. Like this is an intelligence. This is an awareness, and then earth and then air. So then I look at the clouds and I notice the bugs flying and the birds and feel the wind, and fire. It's just really the sun, just the sun and light, and maybe the light on the water, anywhere where I notice that or I feel it or see it. And then water. So then I just look at it. I can feel it in my body, just different ways to connect with it, feeling the oneness with it, and also receiving and just knowing that that way of communicating is, it's not necessarily like I'm going to hear words or get a clear picture of, oh, you need to do this or heal this. It's more like this is a kind of a nonlinear way of communicating and receiving information and exchanging information.
Mm.
I feel like that's part of nature too. Like when I tune into a flower or a tree, like I can sense, I mean, I have this feeling, this knowing that flower or tree, they know I'm paying attention. They can feel that. And then it's like you get in, if you ever had if any of your listeners, if you've had a Reiki healing or had any sort of energetic exchange and you tuned into it, like, I feel something happening there. It's like that. It's like, I can feel that we're having a conversation, even if it's not
Mm.
in words, we're exchanging energy. It feels so good to know, because that, I think it's interesting how we use the word nature, that when you look at the way we use that word, it's basically non-human. Like
Mm.
anything that isn't human, that's what we mean by nature. Is it natural or is it have
Hmm.
something to do with humans? It's like we exclude ourselves from that. But the truth is, like, it's not just us observing nature. It's like us being there with nature, being a part of nature. Nature is also observing us.
I'm so glad you said that part. There's so much you said that I wanted to speak to. The first, I'm going to respond with this quote that I love. Have you ever read the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer?
No, I would like to. I've heard about it. I've been meaning to.
It will definitely touch you. It's an amazing book. But someone had sent me an article that she wrote, and I loved at the top was a quote from her that says, "To be native to a place, we must learn to speak its language." And I'm always seeing everything through the lens of somatic psychology in the body, especially with the way you just said it with nature being other than us, right?
Mhm.
Something in the natural world removed from us and we're the observer. And I see the soma or the body as the earth. I don't really see a difference. I see like the bones or the rocks, and like
Yes.
the warmth is the fire and the blood is the water and the creeks.
Yeah.
There's all the air is obviously our breath. So this ecosystem inside of us is something that we see outside of us in a bigger way. Like when you're sitting at the creek, that's like a huge, let's say, blood vessel that you're sitting by,
Hmm. Hmm.
just to create that relating. This is what really gets me. You know, mind invented language, but sensation and vibration is something that's so universal, that it's
Right.
even found in outer space, right? So I get interested when you say there's a conversation and it's not with words, right?
Hmm.
It's like through our senses, through our energy.
Yeah.
A question I have about that for you is, where do you physically, like, if you think about the creek and this
Mhm.
relationship you've made with this body, where do you feel it in your body? Like, how do you feel the creek? What's that like for you?
That's so interesting. So I this reminds me of breath meditation, how breath meditation teachers will say, wherever you feel the breath, notice it. It might be in your nose, it might be in your chest, it might be in your belly. And for that and for the creek, I have it through the whole body. I just feel it everywhere. Like when I breathe in and I notice I'm breathing in, I feel energy rushing all throughout my body, all the way to my hands, my feet. I might notice like space opening, different parts of my body opening as I breathe. But it's similar to me with nature. It's a whole body feeling to me. I think if I'm making a point of anchoring in, if I'm like, oh, I've really been in my head or I have been feeling uncomfortable or stressed, I might purposely connect with the feeling of gravity or the feeling of my tailbone on the earth. But there are subtleties that I could describe, like the different elements. If I'm specifically tuning into those, I might feel them differently. Like the water, I'm like, oh, I feel a softening. I feel a kind of a downward pull or a melting kind of feeling. And that light feels maybe more expansive, warm. Maybe I would feel, I could even, when I'm tuning in or thinking about it, I can imagine feeling the sunlight at my third eye, like bringing light into that area or opening up the crown chakra. So it depends. Oh, and I do feel like the sun does resonate at my heart too. But all of this could also shift based on what I'm placing my awareness on or what I'm choosing. We really have so much subtlety in the body
Mm-hmm.
that we can that we can kind of voluntarily move or open, but that also just like is naturally there. That it's so interesting. The more you pay attention to that, the more you pay attention to the energy moving through your body, the more subtleties open up.
Oh yeah, it's like a universe.
Yeah.
So many layers in there. And part of that subtlety, and I'm glad you used that word, when I think of trauma healing, one of the let's say like elements or branches of trauma healing that makes it successful. So to heal trauma successfully, which in somatic terms really just means the body is no longer storing a sensation or expectation of threat. Like it's released the threat, the memory or the expectation of threat.
Uh-huh.
And now there's an openness and it can relate to its surroundings, let's say. So if I think of somatic trauma healing and I think of like collective healing, there's this there's this branch that's so important, which is relationship. Like, how am I attuning to another being? How's that other being attuning to me? And in situations where people have a car accident, let's say, those who have someone with them that can hold them, or someone that's like petting them, or it's going to be okay, or like reassuring them,
Yeah.
much less likely to be traumatized because there's another nervous system to relate to when yours has
Uh,
too much charge, right?
yeah.
So when you talk about the creek, and I'm actually looking at my creek right now, um,
Uh,
you know, I'm on the second floor of my house. I can see this creek out here. Not really my creek, but that creek. And if I think of you sitting by it, or see myself sitting by it, and I kind of do like an aerial view, from the sky, it's this huge being with a much bigger capacity than you have in your small body in
mhm,
comparison. Do you feel that? Like, do you feel the expanse and largeness of the earth? And does that settle you? Like, what's that
mhm.
like? Yeah, tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. Yes. See, I think that also is an important piece of my spiritual path is being aware. Yeah, I am this little Tess that is in this separate body in one way. And I have little things that I care about in this life. And that's real. But then also being aware of the bigger picture where I'm also one, my consciousness is one with divine consciousness, with infinite consciousness, and my body is one with the earth. Like the shifting between those two, being aware of the reality of both of them at the same time. And then being able even to channel the power that comes from being aware of your infinite nature or your connection with the earth into your, breathing that into your day-to-day goals and desires, maybe the ways you want to heal, being able to consciously channel that. And each one nourishes the other. It nourishes, it balances, sort of harmonizes your goals, your life experience, to be like, yeah, this is important. But it's relatively important based on, who I really am, my eternal nature, my infinite nature, my interconnection with the planet, with the solar system, with the cosmos. Like having that awareness feels like a really big piece of my spiritual path.
Now, when you're saying that, a question comes to my mind. Um, because you're so aware and you have this practice of being in relationship with the whole, right? The sun, the stars, the universe, the mystery beyond, things you can't even see or understand. Because you have that practice, does that also mean you don't experience being lonely? Like, if you're alone, what's that like for you? Do you experience like I'm alone, I'm lonely, or do you always feel connected? How does
Oh,
that
that's
move?
interesting. I mean, I do think it takes the edge off. It takes the edge off the
Yeah.
loneliness. But are still times when I have felt like, I'm thinking about New Year's. It seems like around New Year's, maybe not this year, but frequently, in the past, around New Year's, and sometimes on my birthday too. There's been this feeling that I get of isolation or loneliness, even if my partner's there, I'm talking to friends. There still can sometimes be this sense of like, oh, no one really loves me. Like it has come up still.
Mhm.
Um, but it is, I think the more I practice, the older I get, and the more I have this sort of comfort knowing that it feels more like, okay, I'm moving through this now. This is temporary. It feels real, but I also know that it's going to move through, and I have tools to help myself heal as I go through. I feel like it's important for us to know that those things will come up. It's not like for me, I think the spiritual path also, I have learned, it's not about getting to a point where I don't ever have pain come up anymore. I don't feel lonely anymore, or I don't make mistakes. It's
Mhm.
more, how do I how do I move into that when that does come up?
Yeah, we call that cycles of rupture and repair, where there's
Ah.
like in a lifetime you're going to rupture. I think we may have talked about this on your podcast, but there's going to be inevitable ruptures,
Hmm.
and that's like a requirement to be alive. Like you're going to
Yeah.
experience those things. It's like, do you have the practice in place for the repair to meet the rupture when it happens?
Yeah.
Right? Or are you just stuck in the rupture? And it's kind
Right.
of like, it's good that you say that, because some people have this concept of healing where they just like hit a pinnacle and they ride it out till they die.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's really possible.
It's not realistic. And what I find to be really interesting about what you do is that the longer I practice my spirituality in this way, the more I realize it's like, over time, I feel like my body softens more and more and opens more and more. And I learn to kind of, instead of, when pain comes up, instead of retreating, I learn to
Mm,
breathe into it and open
mm.
up. And it is so, to me, it's so interesting that the more I open up and soften, the more sensitive I become. And it's just like, it shows me how tender this life experience is, right?
That's so
It's
beautiful.
just,
Yeah.
there's so much, like, whether it's beauty, whether it's love, whether it's grief, whether it's loneliness. I mean, it's so profound, and it's like, you can understand why people might naturally shrink away from it, because being in a body is intense.
I'm so glad you're saying that. And those of you who can't see us that are listening, Tess is doing these great movements with her hand. Like you're saying, when there's pain instead of constricting, and you're making a fist. Instead of constricting, you're learning how to open up into it and through it. And
Yeah.
that's what's the most difficult piece of trauma healing. And I think life is, there's this counterintuitive, very strange experience of when something hurts,
Yeah.
that the natural thing is to wince.
Right.
And it's like, well, what if I didn't wince? What if it hurt and I opened and expanded and breathed into it? It's like, oh, that hurt actually moves. And
Yes.
it, right, it takes enough practice to start believing that that's true.
Yeah. And it's like, it is sort of like when you get a massage and you're tense and it hurts, but it feels good.
Right,
It feels good
correct.
and it hurts at the same time. And I realize, I think maybe earlier on in my life when I was in the spiritual path, I thought, oh, one day I'll get to a point where it never hurts. Nothing ever hurts ever again. And now I realize, no, it's really about learning how to open up to feel more and more deeply. And it's sort of a mix of pain and joy and pleasure, and
Hmm.
it's very
Hmm.
intense.
Well, when it's what I love again about looking at the earth. It's fall right now in the Northeast, and I'm seeing these like fiery trees, these beautiful colors. And it's like as the leaves are dying and the breeze comes in, it's really cold. The trees aren't like grasping for their leaves, they just
Yeah.
release, don't
Ah,
they? You know, and
yes.
in spring they just release and all this syrup comes out and the sap flows. It's like there's this constant cycle in nature when we look at it, of release in the face of trauma and pain.
Yes.
Is even like cutting down a tree, it doesn't fight you.
Yeah.
That's something really radical about that to me.
Opening, surrendering. I feel like animals have that too, that they're surrendered to what's happening. And when I communicated with flowers, I wrote a book called The Magic of Flowers.
Mhm.
And with each flower that I wrote about, I connected with it and I opened to it. And that, I feel like every blossom has that wisdom too, that it's so tender and it's so open, it's so surrendered.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I finally watched the documentary Fantastic Fungi. I don't know if you've ever heard
Oh,
of it.
no, I
It's
haven't.
at least 30 people told me you have, like, for 2 or 3 years you have to watch this. And so I finally watched it. Highly recommended. What's so cool is the documentary shows how the mycelium, which is like, like the root system of the mushrooms, how
Mhm.
it stretches across the entire planet, and it acts as this giant nervous system on the planet.
Wow.
And so as people are walking or animals are walking on the actual dirt and the forest ground, it's sending signals like for miles, and
Wow.
communicating to the trees and the flowers and the mushroom fruits that are coming up. And so when you were saying the piece, about, we're talking about nature not constricting,
Yeah.
my mind sees part of that is because it's so connected to the whole, there's nothing to fear because it just goes right back into itself. It's
Yeah.
like, and we have that same connection, but because we're not physically attached, I think there's sometimes this concept that we're separate from, and there's a pain in identifying with that separation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but do you think it has to do too with, I mean, it feels sort of to me like, if you touch a hot burner, you retreat and it's a survival
Mhm.
thing. So it feels like a similar dynamic to me. It's like, oh, there's pain I'm connecting with that's related to my childhood. I got to get away from that. I've got to tense up. I've got to do whatever I can. But you can't
Yes.
really get away from it. That's what you learn over time. But it
Yes.
is interesting how we do have that instinct sort of to tense up around it and try not to feel it, but it's in
Yes.
us already.
Well, that's the piece right there that interests me, is that because it is a natural reflex. Like if a baby touches something hot, obviously it's going to scream and cry and want to get away from it.
Yeah,
And thank goodness,
which is
because
good. Yeah.
yeah. Where we're so different, I believe, is the ego. It just holds on to the images and expects more of them, versus updating to where it is in the moment, right? So the pain of a childhood experience, like you said, it gets stored in the body, And then there's like an unconscious expectation, second to second, of pain to happen again.
Yeah.
Versus when you, even when you see like a tragedy, like a baby deer get hit by a car
Yeah.
and the mother's right there, like she keeps moving. There's this part of her that it seems like she's so, and this is my observation, right?
Yeah.
That she's just so in the present. There's actually this great video of I think it's like a leopard or a lion or something chasing an impala, and the lion gets tired and like falls over, and the impala just stops running and like eats grass like 20 feet from the
Oh,
lion. So
wow.
you're seeing it, not thinking of the lion as a murderer or it's going to get me. It's just kind of like, oh, that's over. I'm going to eat some grass.
Right?
There's like immediacy of presence.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. I wonder, is it, do you think it's like a glitch that we have, or could it be related to? Because I was just thinking yesterday, I mean, because we talked about this in my podcast too, what interesting monkeys we are as
Oh yeah.
humans. But I was thinking, okay, we have cell phones, we have spaceships, and other species don't even have fire. They don't even have a
Yeah.
wheel. Like
Yeah.
that's so different. But we're such a different species. So do you think it has to do with that? How we are so, because that what differentiates us is like we can manipulate our environment, we can create what we want, we can fly if we want,
Hmm.
we can talk to people on the other side of the planet. Is
Hmm.
it like I don't have to feel that pain? Where a deer is like, if I can't even conceive of any other option.
That's what it seems like to me, because when I think of everything you're saying about like things that we've invented or our advancements, compared to if we see like a beaver builds a beautiful house and it
Oh,
ends
right.
there,
Yeah,
it doesn't take over the world. you
right.
know what interests me is this, like we have this strange ability to project, and I don't see animals project. We see them react, we see them respond, but we don't see them project as much. And we have this humans, like you say, these strange monkeys we are. We have this thing that says like, okay, first of all, I want to observe myself, then I want to replicate myself, and then I want to like imagine what's next. And so
Right.
like when I say project, I mean imagine. So there's something about our imaginations and our
Yeah.
obsession with ourselves that kind of, I think, fuels these advancements.
Right. And then, well, but then holding on to the trauma too, is it like, is it that? Is it also maybe now I'm feeling pain and that means that I'm going to continue feeling pain forever. So I have to retreat from that. It's like, it just feels
Yes.
like there's some kind of glitch that maybe your work is focused on pointing to and helping us move through, evolve out of, it seems like.
Well, yeah, when you say the word glitch, I mean, that's literally how I see it, because
Ah,
the trauma response is really healthy. Like if someone is chasing me, it's a healthy response to run,
yeah,
and like an animal will run away from you. It's like healthy to have a trauma
right,
response. But like you just said, the glitch for us is then the images of them chasing us don't leave,
right.
and we keep expecting more. And so we keep feeling more threat,
Yeah,
versus when it's over, we don't just, oh, it's over, we
right.
stay in the thread. That's where I see the glitch, exactly what you're
Yeah,
saying. It's very
yeah,
interesting, isn't it?
it is. And so it does. And I really relate to that because in my spiritual path, it does feel like I get into my body, I can feel like, oh, there's pain. Oh, good. There's the pain. Let's breathe into that pain.
Mm.
Let's get in there. Let's let it move through. Like I can feel that now. Because it, like, I just did a oracle reading for the week and I was talking about how I was feeling emotional pain. And I felt like I needed to clarify this isn't me saying this is bad. Like to me, this is like, oh yeah,
Mm.
I'm
Mm.
feeling pain.
I
I
love that.
feel,
I
feel the
love
grief.
that. See, that's a big part, and that's also why, I wonder about your practice and your work. And this might be a generalization, but many witches I've experienced, they're not afraid of pain. It's like part of the path. It's the
Mhm.
spiral. It's part of the path of going into the whole natural experience.
Yeah.
Like when I think of a witch, and there's all these secondary things that come out from it, like there's the spells, there's the rituals, there's looks, there's all these things we associate and we practice. But when I think of the real core of what a witch is for me, is someone that just understands their part of nature and they're with nature
Mhm.
versus like separate from it or
Yeah.
owning it, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess I'm saying that because I think I lost my train of thought. No,
Happens.
it came back.
Oh.
I released it and it came back. Because we're saying about this practice of uh, being open to the pain. And when I think of, again, when I think of a witch and the practices of witches, we look in nature, we learn from nature, we move with nature, and we're open to everything natural.
Yeah.
And right in like a non-dual way.
Right.
And pain is just as natural as pleasure,
Yes.
right? So there's no like shame of having it. And so am I right for you as well, or is that just how I experience it?
Well, yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. There's no shame in having it. But also, I think I feel the interconnection. Like I literally can feel that it's not one or the other, it's both.
Mm,
That when for example, after I cry, have a really good cry, I sleep so well. I laugh so deeply. I can feel my
mm,
energies flowing and moving.
mhm. I like that you said that it's interconnected for you, because I've come to find that pain is part of the same charge that is pleasure.
Yeah,
The difference is the body constricts or it expands, but it's still that same charge, that initial root
right.
energy.
Yeah, and so then a lot of the different the what we think of as being the difference between them is a story.
Mm,
And this is
mm,
the same with love and grief.
mhm.
You can feel that they're the same feeling.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that. One of my favorite things to say is that grief is so much love. Like you're
Yes.
sickened with how much love you have, and you
Yes.
believe you can't give it to that person anymore, and you feel horrible and you grieve. And
Yes.
I find that awareness of, oh, I can still love this person possibly even more in death than
Right.
when they were alive, like heals my grief and moves, right? Because that connection comes back. But you're talking about story there. That's
Uh-huh.
important. Like,
Yeah, no, but
tell
I
us what you
love the
mean by
way you
that.
said that. Oh, well, just that I mean, you just really paraphrased the feeling I have is that when I tune into grief, it's that's love. That's intense love. And feeling, I agree, feeling that that interconnection between the seen and the unseen. So
Mm,
my family, I was raised in a funeral chapel family. And my dad still works at the funeral chapel. My uncle still works there. And I was just there. I was visiting. But every time I go, I can feel there's an energy there at the funeral chapel that is, even though I'm not always the one experiencing grief, I can feel that it opens the loving someone who's on the other side opens a door
mhm,
of light.
mm,
It's like it creates the sense, it helps me feel that oneness, that removal of that illusion of separation
mm.
between the physical and the non-physical. So shining love through that door, that veil, is a powerful spiritual experience.
I'm curious for you, what, because you have many books about like trees and flowers and plants and how they speak to you and what they're used for and what kind of gets channeled through you, right?
Mhm.
What I'm curious if you could, if this feels appropriate, if there's a flower, herb, and or tree that you consistently come by that helps you with grief or trauma or pain, or is there a particular one for you that you like to be with? Or you, okay, good, tell us about that.
Yeah, my relationship with lilacs is just off the hook. I mean, I love all flowers and trees and plants and herbs. I do, but when I see a lilac in bloom, I cry. I mean, the
Mm,
first time I see it in the season, like the lilacs are in bloom, and then I go up to one, and every time I cry
mm,
because it is, and it's interesting that you said it right then because it's that exact feeling that I have at the funeral chapel. It opens that veil for me. I can feel that interconnection. It opens the crown chakra, which is like removing that illusion of separation between seen and unseen, known and unknown.
mm. And what about tree? What's your favorite
You
tree?
know, aspens, since I've been in
Aspens.
Colorado, I have realized how deeply I love aspens.
And what's your way of working with them? Is it literally just sitting by them? Is it visualizing them? Do you make medicine from them? Like how do you relate?
Well, with trees, yeah, I mean, my relationship with trees is really being with trees. So looking at trees, it's breathing while I'm looking at a tree, looking at a tree and breathing.
Yeah.
Very simple.
I
Or
love
sitting by a
but but
tree.
but what's not simple is the attunement to the subtleties of what's happening in your body when you're doing
Oh,
that,
right.
right?
Yeah.
Because it's like there's this, the reason why I love teaching embodiment is once you're like really able to feel those layers of your body, these very simple, like seemingly mundane experiences become like psychedelic adventures,
Right.
right?
I agree. Yeah. And then there's also so much information there.
So much
It's like,
information.
what do you need to know?
Yeah.
Maybe you're not going to know everything. Everything might not be available to you, but what you need to know is there when you listen and you tune in.
Yeah. It's been so lovely having you and speaking with you. I kind of want to ask you before we go if there's any book of yours in particular that you'd like to point anyone toward, or your website, or anywhere we can find more of your work.
Thank you for asking. So, I have a new book out called The Self Love Superpower: The Magical Art of Approving of Yourself No Matter What.
Ooh,
And
ooh, say that again. Say that one more time. That sounds
The
great.
Self Love Superpower, that's the name. And then the subtitle is The Magical Art of Approving of Yourself No Matter What.
Oh, it gives me chills. I love that.
Oh, thanks.
And where can they
Yeah.
find it?
Oh, wherever you like to buy books.
Great. So you can just type that in, purchase it.
Yeah. Or on my website, which is tesswhitehurst.com.
Tess, thank you so much for joining me today. It was really nice to talk with you.
Thank you so much. It was a delight.